Dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
One thing is for sure, to do anything, you have to start doing it. A lot of people have great ideas that could even change the world. But if they don't start and actually make things happen, nothing will ever get done. The same held true for the lives of the saints, like St. Paul. He too had to face many obstacles, and he lived in constant uncertainty. And yet, he started things anyway. Starting is an art and a science, and I hope that St. Paul's example can inspire you today. Hey everybody, and welcome back. I'm glad you're here to go deeper with me, right? I love these courses because we who are doing leadership often don't take the time to reflect back on what we're doing, right? We just kind of do it. We're thrown into battle. We suddenly find ourselves as a mother with children and they're running around the house and we simply have to take care of them. Or we find ourselves in our careers working and we don't always reflect back on, is there a better way to do it? How do I improve what I'm doing every day? Well, that's what these courses are for, right? So congratulations. And even more, I love the fact that what we're doing is grounding your action in your faith, right? To look at your life like a mission. Jesus Christ sent me into this marriage. Jesus Christ sent me into this business. This is your privilege as a Christian. You get to think and believe that everything that you do is purposeful, full of a divine purpose and meaning that God himself has given to you as your mission upon the earth. Some people might think, oh, that's kind of exaggerating things, or that's making yourself into some sort of hero. But I just want you to reflect on this for a second. Why not? Right? What's so bad about thinking great about yourself? I'll tell you one thing everybody who's ever achieved anything great in this life has in common, and that's that they dared to believe that they could. The easiest way for you to stay in mediocrity or stay in simply where things are, keep going in the way things are, even if they're not great, even if they're not good, is to believe that you don't have the right to change or to even try to do something better. With Christianity, you not only have the right to do so, you have the obligation to do so because you are no longer alone. You live with Christ. And Christ lives within you. Okay, so if he lives within us, then he's going to be impelling us forward. And he's going to be asking us to do the things that he himself did while he was on the earth. He even says to his apostles, greater things than what you have seen me do, you will do. Now, obviously, that's not going to be for all of us and all the circumstances of our lives. And, some of us live lives that are very normal and rather obscure. That's not the point. The point is not whether or not everybody knows it. The point is whether or not every second that you live, wherever you live, is full of love, full of God's love. To dare to believe that God could make you his instrument, that you could be a part of the difference, of the change, making things better in this world instead of worse. As soon as you begin to think that way, will you enter into Christian leadership? You will allow God to use you as his instrument in the world. That's what it means to be a Christian leader. Many people can lead. Being a leader means making an impact. It means changing the world around you, right? If you influence others, then you're leading them. Okay, so anyone can do that. What we're trying to do is not just bring our influence or our impact into the world, but to bring God's. So that's just an astounding thought, right? To bring God's impact into our world, to become his instruments. Now think about that. What's necessary to do that? To do that, the very first thing I have to believe is that God wants to use me and that I can, by surrendering my life into him, actually make that impact. I need, in other words, to really want it, right? And after really wanting it, well, then after that, I can start to make the difference. And that's something I want us to reflect on today. Because honestly, it's something a lot of people struggle with. We know what's right. We even know what we want to do. We know what might be good to do. But it's hard sometimes to then cross the threshold and actually get it done. And remarkably, it's not so much that we're lazy, that's the reason. There's all kinds of interference that can run in our minds the moment that we pass from planning into action. It's almost like we have to cross a bridge from one shore to the other, from one place which is safe and warm inside of us into the cold and dangerous outside of us, where things can be judged, where things can be risked, and where we might fail in the end. It's a very scary thing to start things, because it's almost like then you've accepted that you can't go back. I remember doing a study on Saul Alinsky, who was a very famous community organizer, and his whole science was, how do you change a group of people from one state to the next, right? And so Saul Alinsky had this theory. He said, well, if you need to move people from A to B, you don't just move them from A to B. You need to move them from A to A prime to B. And what he meant by that is the very first movement begins not by a change on the outside, but by the disposition to change, where you get the group of people to actually want to take the step from their current state, A, to their future state, B. And so the first elements of change are to get the people ready to make that leap. Now, I don't endorse Saul Alinsky or his thinking, but it's telling, right? For what he's saying is, once you begin, once you make a first change, an initial change, well, then the rest of things kind of flows automatically. Once you start to act and begin to set the ball in motion, well, then the motion continues from there. It's that starting point that's so hard for many of us. And I want you to think to yourselves, why? Why is it that starting is such a challenge for me? From getting out of bed in the morning to making the bed that I just got out of, to eating properly, to starting a new diet. It's like almost like we all know what we should be doing, but then actually getting to begin it is a challenge for us. And the question is why? It's going to be different for each person. Every person has a different reason, a different motivation to not want to start. But all of them, regardless of the motivation, will end up in the same place, the status quo. And I just want you to realize and think, my goodness, what would my life look like if I do not do these great things that I intend on doing? And I don't want you to think about that, not just in terms of yourself, but the others. When I don't get up to clean the house, how does that impact the lives of those who depend upon me? When I don't teach my children to play music or to develop themselves in great ways, or if I don't parent my children, what is that? Every time we leave a hole in the world, something else fills it. So if we're not filling the hole, the gap that's needed for us to fill with God or something positive, we're literally leaving that gap open for someone or something else to fill. It's like that old saying, empty hands are a devil's playground. I want you to become enamored with the prospect of what your life could look like if it was filled with the good things of God. If you were to fill the time and the abilities that you have with love. What would my life look like if I really was able to dedicate it to God? Well, St. Paul can show us what that looks like. I mean, we look at what he did with his life. It kind of is astounding, right? He wrote half of the New Testament. If we even wrote a line of the New Testament, we'd be really happy. He wrote 13 books of the New Testament. He traveled all throughout the world of his time. He spoke multiple languages. He knew all kinds of cultures. He met all kinds of peoples. He had fantastic adventures. But he did it all because he actually began. And I want to look at his life with you to see if there's a lesson there. What did St. Paul have to overcome in order to start? And what lessons can we learn by the way that St. Paul endured after he started things? So let's get into it.
Would you like to hear more from Father Nathan? Join the St. John Leadership Network and receive a 2-minute glance at the gospel every Sunday morning right to your phone. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
There's no doubt that St. Paul is a man of extraordinary action. There's a whole side to him which is contemplative that we could explore, his mystical revelations, or the years that he spent in the deserts of Arabia, or even just the quiet that his life did have. I mean, he spent at least 6 years in prison alone. That's a long time to think, a long time to pray. There's a lot to be said about St. Paul's contemplative life. And, maybe one day I'll teach on that. It's just that I'm not teaching a bunch of contemplatives right now. At the same time, that you got to admit, he could never have done all that he did and been as active as he was if it wasn't rooted in something much bigger than his activity. Right? When we talk about contemplation, we're not talking about being still and not thinking about anything. We're talking about love, about being one with the one whom we love. And nothing is more dynamic or more explosive for action than true contemplation. Right? So St. Paul was rooting himself in his relationship with Jesus Christ in times of quiet, of course, in times of prayer, of course, in the liturgy, absolutely, but without allowing that quiet to keep him from action. Instead, it inspired his action. And St. Paul was someone whose life was full of making a change. He would go to places on purpose, he said, where the church had never been planted before, in order to bring Christ to people who did not yet know him. Already, this is a difference. Other apostles did it differently. They would build on what another apostle had already built, and that's a fine thing. St. Paul will even say, he says, one plants, another waters, and another one harvests. But St. Paul was definitely on the planting side of the thing. He would go to places that did not know Christ and begin any way that he could to make Christ known. And then he would build on that initial start in order to let the thing grow. I think, for example, when he came to Philippi, it's one of the most beautiful passages in the New Testament. It's in Acts chapter 16. It says literally that Paul's strategy was to go into synagogues and proclaim the gospel. But when he goes to Philippi, there is no synagogue. So what do you do when there is nothing in front of you to do? Well, you take the next step. You do what you need to do to keep moving. So he goes to the riverside to pray, and he finds there a group of devout Jews who are praying. So they don't have a synagogue, but they go down by the river in order to pray there. And St. Paul finds there a group of people willing to listen to him. And he starts to teach the Jews who would be praying in a synagogue but don't have one about Jesus Christ as if he was standing in the synagogue himself. It's amazing. And St. Lydia ends up converting, becoming baptized by Paul right there, and then housing Paul and his companions as they preach the gospel there in Philippi. And there he begins a church that exists even to this day. You can go to Philippi in Greece and attend church right there. Now, there's a lot to be said about Philippi. You could also look at St. Paul, for example, in Athens. When he comes, he's been persecuted. He gets kicked out of Philippi, goes to Thessaloniki. From Thessaloniki to Berea, he gets kicked out of Berea. Then another mob attacks him. So he gets on a boat and travels to Athens. And he gets to Athens, and he's all by himself. He has no money, and he simply ekes out his existence and begins to speak about Jesus Christ to anyone who will listen. He's going up and down the streets, just talking to anyone who will listen to him about Jesus. It's really incredible. But St. Paul, wherever he was, found a way to start. He didn't expect things to be perfect. He didn't ask them to be perfect. He took what he had and he did something with it. And I want to go into that level of industry and try to pick that apart with you. What was going on in St. Paul that allowed him to do that? Because honestly, for a lot of us, we struggle with that. We have a lot of excuses, reasons why we don't start things. Now, remember, I asked you to think, what was that for you in your personal life? Why is it that you struggle to pass from passivity into action? And it's going to be different for each one of us. It's going to be different at different times. I think a lot of times it comes down to fear. You see, starting action means that you shift out of a world that's inside of you into the world that's outside of you. Once you start something, you render it objective. You pass from the subjective world inside of you into the objective world outside of you. You make your heart visible. Well, obviously, there's going to be a lot of things that are difficult at that point. Because if you make your heart visible, it can be judged. Other people can look at that heart and then say, we find it to be deficient, or we find it to be different from what we thought. And that judgment can be something that's very scary for us. Sometimes it's full of consequence. When you give an idea and it's looked at as a bad idea, well, then you feel like that quote from Mark Twain, right? It is better to be silent and thought a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt. And many of us feel that way. It's better for me just to have aspirations and feelings inside for things that I could do or might want to do, but and at least feel safe with having them inside than actually trying to spell them out and make them real. Right? And I agree, it might be safer for you subjectively, but it will keep you from growing. In order to become a great person, we need to dare great things. It's just necessary. I'm not saying to dare great things in terms of size or in terms of what other people think about the world, but I'm thinking I've got to dare the things that I have in my heart. I need to try them. If I do not act, I can never lead. And if I do not lead, then I cannot make an impact. And if I do not make an impact, then someone else will be doing that in my life and in my sphere of responsibility. If you're not teaching your children, someone else is. And if you're not leading your business, someone else is. And if you're in charge of an organization and you're scared to take the organization to where it needs to go, well, then you're not leading that organization. You might be managing it, but I don't think you'll even be an ineffectual manager. Because the management constantly requires adjusting to hit the goal. You need to be able to say, in this situation, this is what we need in order for us to achieve what we're here to do. You have to act. You have to leave the warm subjectivity of your own knowledge of your goodness and your own sense of your worth and pass into the objective world where, yes, you might be judged, you might be held accountable. There's risk when you act. And a lot of us are risk averse. I mean, after all, isn't it easier just to stay in the warm and safe world where no one can judge you than instead going out where actually maybe the energies that you spent won't be repaid. And maybe the efforts that you made won't reach fruition, right? So because of that risk, we want to pull back. We want to hold in and say, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to make a choice. Because if I make a choice, I might be wrong. I want you to think about this. The choice to not make a choice is a choice. And every choice has consequences. So by your choosing to not act, you actually are acting. Which means the real question is not whether or not we're going to act or we're going to do something, but whether or not the course of our action is going to be the best choice that we can make. And yes, a lot of times choosing not to act is a very good thing. Refraining and holding back, those are positive things. I'm not describing those situations. I'm describing the things where you know the right thing to do. You know what you should do. You know what you want to do and what you ought to do. And you just stop on the precipice of actually doing it because of fear. That's a very different thing from choosing not to act. This is a choosing to allow your fears to dominate your life. And this is where Christ wants to step in, because Christian leadership requires that you pass from that warm place of soft subjectivity, yes, into the cold, harsh world. Why? Because we want that heart of yours, which is inside of you, to become effective and to pass outside of you into this world to make an impact with it. God wants to save the world, and he wants to do it with us. That requires that we step out into the world, even if it's like stepping out into a storm. But we step out bravely with Jesus and in our faith. This is exactly what St. Paul did as well.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
Watching the life of St. Paul is fascinating because it's watching the life of a fellow who simply refused to die. The only way that he finally died was when they took his life by chopping his head off. That was the only way they could get his mouth to stop talking about Jesus, was literally to cut his head off. And that's exactly what they did in Rome. But up until that point, St. Paul was like a machine. He just moved through this world powerfully from one situation to the next. An example, when he's in Philippi, he preaches and does this wonderful miracle where he liberates a young woman who's possessed by the devil. Well, the owners of this woman, who were keeping her in slavery in order to make money for them, when they found out that St. Paul did this, they threw him into prison. And so St. Paul, you say, well, therefore he stopped. There's nothing he can do in prison. Not true. St. Paul's laying in prison with St. Titus, and the two of them are singing psalms together at midnight. This is an amazing scene. Laying in prison, chained to the floor, their ankles chained to the floor, their wrists chained and bound in chains. Paul and Titus are laying on the ground singing to God in the middle of the night. Even in prison, with his legs bound and his hands bound, Paul was in action. He was taking whatever situation he had and turning it towards the one with whom he was in love. Christ had claimed his heart, and so Christ claimed his action. And so it didn't matter where he was. It reminds me of the principle and foundation of the spiritual exercises by St. Ignatius of Loyola, where he says that we should not prefer riches to poverty or health to sickness, provided that we achieve our mission in life, which is to glorify God and to be with him. And St. Paul shows us this because even when he's then released from prison, an angel comes and loosens his bonds, which is already amazing, and opens all the doors of the prison. You know what St. Paul does? He literally begins to preach to the jailer. The guy comes in who is supposed to be watching the prison, sees that all the doors are open, thinks that Paul's escaped, and draws his sword to kill himself, rather than, of course, suffer the punishments for his negligence. And Paul says, no, we're here. And why are you here? He wants to tell him about Jesus Christ. You see, he takes any circumstances that he can, and he turns it into action. What was in Paul's heart that was allowing him to do this? I'll tell you the first lesson we can look at. The very first thing St. Paul shows us is that love has to dominate our life. The more that we love, the more that we resist the temptation to stay in the warmth of possibilities, and we insist on moving forward into things that really exist. When you're in love, you don't want to say, well, I want to think nice thoughts for you. It's that I want to serve you. I need to serve you, right? The more genuine your love is, the more real and constant your actions will be. And I talk about this in my book, Coached by Paul the Apostle, which is available by Scepter Publishing, right? In that book, Coached by Paul the Apostle, I talk about this. His love was constantly in front of him. He was living in a relationship with Jesus, and living in a relationship with love pushes you outside of yourself. And so the question that I've got for you is, when you think about daring great things or passing into action, do you know why you're doing it? To keep the why always in front of you, the one who needs you, the one who's counting on you, the one who will benefit from your actions, the more that person is in front of you, well, the more that it's easy to pass from the status quo into the great things that could be. For St. Paul, this was Christ. And for all of us, this can be Christ. What a thought that Christ is counting on you. Christ is counting on you. And again, you can take that too far. You can think about it too much. But I don't think most of our problem today is that we think of it too much. I think that we're thinking too little of it is our problem. We act as if our actions don't really matter, as if they can't really make a difference. That's why I love looking at the life of St. Paul, because honestly, he didn't think that way. He made the difference that he could make, regardless of whether or not he thought that difference was everything that needed to be done. Like when he went to Ephesus, for example, which is where in the book of Acts, St. Paul reaches the zenith of his apostolic life. Ephesus is a total success story for Paul. He spends over 3 years there, and leaving Ephesus is a dramatic scene where the Christians come and they throw themselves around him and they beg him not to leave. And this is wonderful place for St. Paul where he does a lot of good. But do you know what he did in order to make that good? Every day he went down into the same spot and he would pace back and forth teaching. And he would teach all day long, every day that he could, anyone who wanted to listen to him. The Christian community grew because of that, but it did not exist before that. That's the point that I want to make with you. You see, like a lot of us, we say, oh man, it's not going to make a difference. How do you know that what you're going to do is not going to make a difference? Maybe we need to stop telling God that first we have to have everything lined up so that we know we're making the most difference. Because honestly, most of us would look around and say, we don't make much difference at all. I mean, if we just honestly look at it, we're going to say, I'm not sure. But when you realize that the most powerful changes in this world don't require a huge program or a huge amount of resources to effectuate, then you understand that God can do great things even with the small things that we give him. Think, for example, of the life of St. John Paul II, one man who changed the course of the world. He literally brought down communism by his preaching. The guy was absolutely phenomenal and impactful in his life. Where did he come from? Well, when you go back to his parents, his mom and dad were told by the doctor that they could not have another child, that it would be irresponsible because the woman's health would be endangered. And yet the mother bore a child anyway. That one choice by those parents to have that one more child, Karol Wojtyła, gave us this Pope who changed the course of history. St. Paul would echo the words of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. God did not ask me to be successful. He only asked me to be faithful. And what a thing if each one of us was to live in that same way. Instead of waiting for the great success to be guaranteed, we took the little steps that we could to do anything that we could so that we could make Jesus be known, and we leave the rest in the hands of God. This is the lesson of St. Paul, and this is what it means to lead. We jump, we get over ourselves, we cross that barrier of inaction, and then we let God do what he wills with our lives.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.